Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf carried out that plan. Together they stabbed and killed Skylar.
What happens when the hand that's meant to nurture suddenly turns bloody, and the person who's meant to love turns murderous?
Sarah Boone, the Florida woman accused of zipping her boyfriend up in a small suitcase and leaving him in there to suffocate, appeared in court Monday representing herself.
This is about the monsters who hid behind their masks of normalcy until the moment they didn't. Here are the craziest female killers reacting to insane sentences. The last one will haunt you forever.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if there's a proper way to make this apology because there are not even words to describe the guilt and remorse.
Number 14, Taylor Schabusiness.
Taylor Schabusiness will stand trial in late October on charges of attacking an officer at Techita Correctional.
Some crimes are horrible, some are uncalled for. But there are some crimes so disturbing they redefine human depravity. On Valentine's Day, 2022, Taylor Schabusiness gave us such a crime in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Shad Therian was a 24-year-old young man with his whole life ahead of him. But what he thought would be an evening of intimacy became his last night alive. As Taylor Schabusiness, his on and off girlfriend, had other plans. During what was supposed to be an intimate time together, something went terribly wrong, and Taylor attacked Therian. Taylor would later claim it was an accident during rough play, but the evidence suggested something far more sinister.
Murdering and dismembering Shad Therian, she does not have parole.
She strangled Shad during their encounter, did not stop even when he started coughing up blood, but pressed on till he died. But that wasn't the end of his suffering. She dismembered his body, scattered his body parts throughout his mother's basement, and stuffed his head in a bucket. When the police arrived after being called by Therian's mother, they found a scene so disturbing that seasoned officers required counseling.
When she was convicted of dismembering and severing the head of her lover, Shad Therian.
But Taylor was nowhere to be found. Months later, Taylor was captured by the police, along with other missing parts of Therian's body. But while her crime disturbed anyone who heard it, it was her reaction that was even more disturbing. Taylor's reaction to her arrest was perhaps more disturbing than the crime itself. She laughed. She smirked. She treated the interrogation like a game, admitting to the murder with casual indifference. During her trial, Taylor's behavior was erratic, violent. She attacked her attorney, screamed at the judge, and showed no remorse for the family she'd destroyed.
Schabusiness went viral after courtroom video captured her attacking her own attorney during a hearing.
When sentenced to life in prison without parole, her reaction was predictable. More laughter, more defiance. But while we talk about killers who showed no remorse, this next killer targeted one of the most vulnerable groups of humans and was heartless about it. Number 13, Juana Barraza. In 2003, in Mexico City, elderly women living alone began disappearing from their apartments. Their bodies were discovered days later, strangled with their own stockings or beaten to death with blunt objects. The media dubbed the killer the Old Lady Killer, and for 3 years, terror gripped the city's aging population.
The little old lady killer terrorized Mexico City's senior citizens out of anger toward her own mother.
In those 3 years, the police searched for a man because, frankly, who else could overpower elderly women with such brutality? They created profiles, sketches, theories, but they were all wrong. The killer was none other than Juana Barraza, a beloved lucha libre wrestler-entertainer. By day, she entertained crowds, but by night, she became something far more terrifying. A predator who preyed on the most vulnerable members of society. When police finally caught her leaving 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro's home in January 2006, Juana didn't run or scream.
Barraza was caught back in 2006 leaving the house of an 82-year-old woman who had been strangled with a stethoscope.
She simply confessed. What followed was a confession that not only confirmed the murders, but her methods and reasons for doing so. Her method was chillingly simple. Posing as a social worker or nurse, she would gain entry to elderly women's homes, win their trust with her gentle demeanor, then strike with devastating efficiency. She would steal small items, not for their value, but as trophies. But the real reason hit harder than anyone could have known. Juana's own mother had been an alcoholic who traded her daughter's body for drinks. The rage that festered in that little girl grew into something monstrous. While she may have confessed to just one crime, she was inevitably linked to 42 more deaths and charged to court. When the judge sentenced her to 759 years in prison, Juana stood silent and showed no emotion.
Juana Barraza has been sentenced to 759 years in jail for killing 16 elderly women.
But you know who else showed no emotion? A female killer who cold-heartedly ended someone she claimed to love. Number 12. Ezra McCandless. She was supposed to be different, but no one could have predicted that she would turn out horribly. At just 20, Ezra was an art student with flowing hair and expressive eyes that spoke of creativity and sensitivity. But beneath that artistic exterior lurked something far more disturbing, an obsession that would leave one man dead and another's life changed. Alex Woodworth was a 24-year-old kind-hearted and trusting man who had no idea that his relationship with Ezra would become a twisted triangle involving another man.
For the stabbing death of her ex-boyfriend, Alex Woodworth.
Jason Mengel. But what started as a love affair quickly became a dangerous game of manipulation and jealousy. On March 22, 2018, Ezra claimed that Alex attacked her in a remote farmhouse in Wisconsin. According to her report, she fought back and defended herself, but the evidence told a different story altogether. Alex's body bore 16 stab wounds that spoke not of self-defense, but of frenzied, calculated violence. How do you stab someone 16 times in self-defense? And how do you explain the methodical nature of wounds that painted the walls red with blood? This was Ezra's story, but when things got serious, her accounts unraveled quickly. She claimed Jason had attacked Alex, then tried to pin the blame on him entirely. But forensic evidence painted a clear picture. Her DNA was under Alex's fingernails, and her blood mixed with his at the scene of the crime.
Ezra McCandless, who was convicted in 2020 for killing her ex-boyfriend, has filed to have her case appealed again.
Thankfully, the jury saw through her lies and fake tears. When the guilty verdict came down, Ezra McCandless received life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, she showed no emotion, finally showing how much of a monstrosity she was. Speaking of monsters, here's another killer who murdered a person who loved them. Number 11. Courtney Clenney. Courtney Clenney was living the influencer dream. Beautiful, successful, with millions of followers hanging on her every post. But behind the camera, Courtney's relationship with Christian Obumseli was turbulent and violent. Neighbors in their luxury Miami apartment building regularly heard screaming, fighting, the sounds of domestic chaos. But unlike regular cases of domestic violence, Courtney was never the victim, but always the aggressor. Several times, neighbors had called police about Courtney's violent outbursts.
Clenney is in the lobby. The employee is the one who actually called police and tells them.
And even hotel staff had witnessed her attacking Christian. Yet somehow, she convinced people that she was the one in danger. On April 3, 2022, the chaos reached its deadly conclusion. Courtney called the emergency line, claiming Christian had attacked her and that she had defended herself with a kitchen knife. The responding officers found Christian bleeding out on their apartment floor, a single stab wound to his chest, proving fatal. At first, Courtney's story held. She was the victim and the abused girlfriend who finally fought back. But as investigators dug deeper, a different picture emerged. Footage from their apartment showed that Courtney was the abusive one, and her text messages further implicated her with threats she had sent.
2 days before investigators say she stabbed him to death.
The fatal stab wound, experts determined, was delivered with significant force. A force more consistent with an attack than self-defense. Along with that, cell phone videos Christian had secretly recorded showed Courtney attacking him repeatedly, calling him racial slurs, and threatening to kill him. In the end, it all tied down beautifully to a case of homicide and intentional murder. When Courtney was finally charged with second-degree murder and received a prison sentence of 25 years to life, her reaction was typical of someone who had spent years manipulating her image online, superficial and stone-cold. But the coldness of her reactions could not be compared to a killer who killed not one, but two people just because she could. Number 10. Mackenzie Shirilla. At just 17, Mackenzie Shirilla made a decision that would destroy multiple lives, including her own. Her on-and-off relationship with 20-year-old Dominic Russo had become increasingly volatile, with friends describing it as toxic and filled with jealousy and manipulation. On July 31st, 2022, Mackenzie accelerated her car to 100 miles per hour and drove straight into a brick building. The crash killed her passengers.
The computer demonstrated that there was no attempt to slow down or stop, that it was full speed into a building.
Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his 19-year-old friend, Davion Flanagan. The crash was so violent that it took hours for first responders to extract the bodies. Dominic and Davion died on impact, but Mackenzie survived with serious injuries and recovered.
She was driving 100 miles per hour. The impact killed her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his friend, Davion Flanagan.
Initially, investigators thought they were dealing with a tragic accident, but as they dug deeper, a different picture emerged. Security footage showed Mackenzie had accelerated into the wall deliberately. In addition to that, there were no skid marks and no evidence that Mackenzie had tried to stop or steer away. The crash reconstruction suggested intentional action and not an accident.
Her actions were controlled. This was not reckless driving. This was murder.
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet?
Furthermore, her phone revealed her state of mind in the days before the crash. She was angry, depressed, and upset with Dominic. She had threatened to hurt him if he left her, and on the morning of the crash, they had been arguing. Mackenzie was charged with aggravated murder, and her reaction was one of wounded innocence. She maintained that it was an accident, that she would never intentionally hurt Dominic or Davion.
I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion.
But during the trial, evidence showed that Mackenzie had been controlling and possessive, and she had threatened violence before. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a murder-suicide attempt, where only Mackenzie survived. When the judge found her guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years, she cried and wailed, not for the victims, but for herself. Number 9. Wendi Andriano. In Ahwatukee, Arizona, Joe Andriano was dying of cancer, but his wife Wendi could not wait for nature to take its course. On October 8, 2000, Wendi decided to hurry things along and send her husband on his way to heaven. She had already collected on one life insurance policy and wanted more. That night, she gave Joe a cocktail of poison, sodium azide mixed into his drink. But when the poison didn't work fast enough, she took more direct action. She beat her dying husband with a bar stool, striking him 23 times as he lay helpless.
Wendi Andriano murdered Joseph by bludgeoning him with a bar stool and stabbing him with a 13-inch knife.
The woman who had vowed to love him in sickness and in health had become his executioner. When paramedics arrived, Wendi played the grieving wife perfectly. She wept, she mourned, and she accepted condolences. But investigators began noticing inconsistencies in her story. The autopsy revealed both the poison and the blunt force trauma, and phone records showed Wendi had been having an affair. But that was not the worst of it. She had researched poisons online, purchased life insurance policies, and even staged the scene to look like a suicide attempt. For her defense, she was a devoted wife driven to desperation by watching her husband suffer, and was simply putting him out of his misery, an act of mercy rather than murder. When the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, Wendi's composure finally cracked. She sobbed as the judge sentenced her to death, the first woman in Arizona to receive capital punishment in decades.
Wendi Andriano is one of 3 women on Arizona's death row. Her case has attracted media attention.
But crying is not always a sign of remorse, as another female killer uses the same tactics in court. Number 8. Shayna Hubers. Her 911 calls were chilling, as she told the operator she had just killed her boyfriend in self-defense. But it was her jailhouse phone calls that revealed who she truly was.
Campbell County 911. Oh, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense. Okay, what's his name?
Shayna Hubers was a University of Kentucky student who seemed to have everything going for her. Beauty, intelligence, charm, a successful attorney boyfriend named Ryan Poston, and a darkness that nobody saw coming. Their relationship was toxic from the start. Shayna was possessive, jealous, and increasingly unstable. And when Ryan finally decided to end things, Shayna couldn't let go. On October 12, 2012, she drove straight to his apartment and killed him. She claimed Ryan had attacked her, forced her to shoot him 6 times to save her own life. But the evidence told a different story. Ryan was shot in the back, in the face, execution style. The wounds were inconsistent with any struggle.
In the Campbell County Jail while awaiting retrial for the murder of Ryan Poston in Highland Heights.
Most damning of all, Shayna had called her friend immediately after the shooting, not to report an attack, but to brag. She laughed about the killing, joked about giving Ryan a nose job with one of her bullets, and seemed more concerned about her appearance in court than the life she'd taken. During her trial, Shayna maintained her self-defense claim, painting Ryan as an abuser who left her no choice, but the evidence said otherwise. 6 shots, including 2 to the head, suggested anything but self-defense.
McBee Taylor describes herself in court documents as transgender and identifies as a woman.
When the judge convicted and sentenced her to life in prison without parole for 42 years, Shayna's mask finally slipped. She broke down crying, not for Ryan, but for herself and the possibility of life behind bars. Number 7. Jodi Arias. She played the part of a grieving girlfriend until she was directly connected to his murder, and then her story changed. On June 4, 2008, in Mesa, Arizona, Travis Alexander was found dead in his shower, his body bearing 27 stab wounds, a gunshot wound to the head, and a slit throat. His girlfriend at the time, Jodi Arias, was nowhere to be seen. When news of the murder hit the public, Jodi mourned in public, even going as far as speaking at Travis's memorial service in tears. But when investigations tied her to the murder, it all went south. First, she claimed she wasn't there. Then she said intruders had killed Travis while she hid. Finally, she admitted to killing him, but claimed self-defense.
It's time for you to just come out and
I didn't
tell
know.
me.
I did not hurt Travis.
Jodi's trial became a media circus, and she seemed to love every minute of it. She gave interviews, sold artwork from jail, and maintained a website. Her testimony was a masterclass in manipulation, painting Travis as an abuser while admitting to acts that contradicted her own claims. The evidence was damning. Photos from Travis's camera showed Jodi at his house on the day of the murder. Despite her initial denials, DNA evidence linked her to the scene. The brutality of the attack spoke to rage, not self-defense. But when the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, Jodi's reaction was subdued. She had spent years preparing for this moment, crafting her image as a victim rather than a killer.
The defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life.
Her sentence? Life in prison without parole. But while she sat in court and listened to the signing away of her life, Jodi maintained her cold composure, still believing she was right. Number 6. Dalia Dippolito. Dalia Dippolito had it all figured out. Married to Mike Dippolito, she would inherit everything when he died. The plan was perfect. Hire a hitman, collect the insurance, play the grieving widow. But sometimes, even the most perfectly laid out plans can go horribly wrong. To the outside world, they seemed like an unlikely but happy couple. Behind closed doors, Dalia was planning her husband's murder. Mike was 20 years older than Dalia, and he had a criminal past. To her, getting rid of him should not be such a bother. Her method was as old as crime itself, but what Dalia didn't know was that her hitman was actually an undercover police officer.
The hitman she hired to carry out the murder was actually an undercover cop.
For weeks, she negotiated the price of her husband's life, settling on $7,000 as a fitting price for her husband's execution. The sting operation was flawless. Police staged Michael's death, complete with crime scene tape and a covered body. When officers arrived at Dalia's door to deliver the news, their cameras captured her reaction. She cried, she screamed, she played the grieving widow to perfection.
It's a great performance. A newlywed in tears after being told her husband has just been found murdered.
But it was just a performance, and hidden cameras had already captured her hiring the hitman, discussing the murder, and even showing excitement for the life insurance money she was going to collect after his death. Within hours, Dalia was under arrest, her murder-for-hire plot exposed.
As you say, Dalia Dippolito is safe for now. She won't be kicked back into jail, and her lawyers aren't being kicked off her case.
With the mountain of evidence against her, there was nowhere to hide. At trial, Dalia's defense team tried to claim she was acting for a reality TV show, that none of it was real. The jury didn't buy it. They had heard her own voice, seen her own actions. She further claimed entrapment, police misconduct, and even suggested that her husband had set her up, but none of that worked in her favor. When the jury found her guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder, her reaction was pure rage. When her sentence of 20 years was read, Dalia still played the victim, even with proof of her lies crumbling before her. Like Dalia, another female killer believed she did nothing wrong, even after being proven guilty. Number 5. Sarah Boone. Sarah Boone seemed like an ordinary woman living an ordinary life in Winter Park, Florida. But on February 23, 2020, she would commit an act so callous it would shock even seasoned investigators. On February 23, 2020, Jorge Torres Jr. thought he was playing a fun game with his girlfriend, Sarah Boone. It wasn't fun. It was murder. Sarah zipped Jorge into a large blue suitcase and left him there to suffocate. She recorded videos on her phone as Jorge pleaded for his life, begging to be let out as his oxygen ran low.
That's what I feel like when you drink on me.
Sarah!
You!
Please, Sarah.
Sarah's response? Laughter, taunting. She told him this was payback for how he had treated her. When Jorge stopped moving, Sarah went to bed. She left his body in the suitcase until the next morning, then called 911, claiming she had found him there and didn't know what happened. Her story was that they had been playing hide-and-seek while drunk, and she had passed out, forgetting he was in the suitcase. But Sarah had made a fatal mistake. She had kept the videos on her phone. The recordings showed Jorge's final moments, his desperate pleas for freedom, and Sarah's cruel indifference to his suffering. This wasn't hide-and-seek gone wrong. It was torture and murder. Sarah had watched Jorge struggle, listened to his pleas, and chosen to let him die. During her trial, Sarah's defense team tried to claim she was a battered woman acting in self-defense. But the videos spoke louder than any testimony. The jury saw a woman who had turned suffocation into entertainment. Sarah Boone was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, she showed little emotion, perhaps still believing her own lies about self-defense. But Sarah was not the only killer who was delirious. Another female killer sobbed and claimed innocence after a hideous crime. Number 4. Sabrina Limon. To the public, friends, and family, Sabrina was a devoted pillar of their community and a lovely wife to her husband, Robert Limon. But behind her perfect smile was a woman who lived a double life. Sabrina was having an affair with Jonathan Hearn, a fellow church member who had become obsessed with her. Their relationship was passionate, secretive, and ultimately deadly. Deadly enough that Sabrina decided she wanted her husband out of the picture permanently, and Jonathan was willing to help. On August 17, 2014, Sabrina and Jonathan got their wishes as Robert was shot twice while working alone at his fire station. The killer had waited for the perfect moment, when Robert was isolated and vulnerable and moved in for the kill. To anyone who heard about it or lived through it at the time, the murder appeared random, a tragic case of violence against a first responder. But like all cases, the law must take its course. Before long, investigators uncovered the truth. Sabrina and Jonathan had indeed killed Robert. Phone records revealed thousands of calls and texts between the two. Their affair had been going on for months, and they had discussed killing Robert multiple times. Jonathan had even purchased the gun used in the murder. When Sabrina was arrested and charged with first-degree murder,
her charges after her alleged lover agreed to testify against her in the death of her husband. She made her first court appearance today.
her reaction was one of wounded innocence. She maintained that she loved her husband and would never hurt him. But that was not the only thing she did. To evade punishment, Sabrina flipped the switch, painting Jonathan as a stalker who had manipulated her into the affair. But the evidence told a different story. The recordings of their conversations showed Sabrina was indeed an active participant in planning her husband's death. She had provided Jonathan with Robert's schedule, helped him plan the attack, and even discussed how they would spend Robert's life insurance money. When the jury found her guilty, Sabrina finally broke down. The woman who had maintained her innocence for years sobbed as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole. Number 3. Beverly McCallum. While she lived freely in her everyday life, the mutilated corpse of her husband lay forgotten. Beverly McCallum lived a double life that would make the most seasoned criminal envious. For over 2 decades, she managed to stay one step ahead of justice, living freely while her husband Robert Caraballo's burned remains lay forgotten in a Michigan field. The case earned its chilling nickname Jack in the Box because after 13 years, investigators received a tip from a woman in Texas who believed the John Doe was her stepfather, Robert Caraballo. What Beverly didn't count on was the persistence of cold case investigators and a tip that would eventually bring her entire world crashing down. In 2002, she had orchestrated her husband's brutal murder with methodical precision, pushing him down the stairs, beating him, and suffocating him before enlisting others to help dispose of his body. Beverly McCallum wanted her boyfriend dead and enlisted her daughter and a friend to kill him, turning what should have been family bonds into instruments of murder. The web of lies Beverly had carefully constructed over 20 years unraveled with shocking speed once investigators connected the dots. After fleeing to Italy with her teenage son, she was finally arrested in a Rome hotel where Italian hotels are required to register guests in an online system linked to a police database that showed she had an Interpol arrest warrant. Extradited back to Michigan, Beverly faced the full weight of evidence that prosecutors had in store for her. The jury needed less than 2 hours before finding Beverly McCallum guilty of second-degree murder and disinterment and mutilation of a corpse, and the judge sentenced her to 40 to 60 years in prison. As the sentence was read, Beverly's facade of innocence finally cracked. The woman who had lived as a fugitive for 2 decades realized that her carefully orchestrated escape had only delayed the inevitable. Number 2. Diana Lovejoy. While going through a divorce with her husband, Greg Mulvihill, Diana Lovejoy grew from hysterical to bloodthirsty. In 2016, in Carlsbad, California, Diana Lovejoy, caught up in a bitter divorce from her husband, was facing a hard time getting her way. The divorce had been nasty, filled with accusations and counter-accusations, with Diana claiming Greg was abusive and Greg maintaining his innocence and fighting for access to their young son. As the custody battle intensified, Diana became increasingly desperate. She couldn't bear the thought of sharing custody with a man she claimed was dangerous. So she decided to eliminate the problem permanently. By recruiting Weldon McDavid Jr., a firearms instructor whom she had met at a gun range, Diana planned to have her ex-husband killed. Their plan was simple: lure Greg to a remote location under the pretense of retrieving some belongings, then ambush him. On the 1st of September, 2016, Greg got a call telling him to come to a specific location to collect items from the divorce. When he arrived with a friend, shots rang out from the darkness. Greg was hit in the side but survived, and his friend escaped unharmed. Investigations quickly began, and it pointed back to Diana and Weldon. Phone records showed they had been in contact before the shooting, and Diana had provided McDavid with Greg's schedule and location. She had also purchased a burner phone to coordinate the attack. Diana was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Her reaction was pure theater. She collapsed in court, claiming she was too weak to stand trial. She maintained her innocence, insisting she was being framed by her ex-husband and corrupt police. But with overwhelming evidence against her, it didn't take long for the jury to find her guilty, and she was sentenced to 26 years. On hearing her sentence, Diana fainted in court, in what appeared to be shock or a fake display of emotions. But no matter how horrible Diana acted for the sake of her son, it cannot be compared to a female killer who set her home on fire to hide evidence of murder. Number 1. Nikki Sue Entzel. A case of extramarital affair grew from infidelity to outright murder in Bursmark, North Dakota. Nikki Sue Entzel seemed to have found new love in her life. While married to 42-year-old Chad Entzel, she had begun an affair with Earl Howard, a married man from Canada. But on the last day of December, 2019, Nikki and Earl decided to take it a step further and get rid of her husband for good. In the early hours of the morning while he slept, Chad was shot twice in the head, instantly dying from the gunshots. But the killing was just the start of the whole plan. The body of Chad was discovered 2 days later, on January 2, 2020, when firefighters responded to a call of the couple's burning home. But the fire was no accident. It was set to destroy evidence and trigger insurance payouts that would fund Nikki and Earl's planned new life together in Texas. But things did not go as planned for the new couple. Investigators found inconsistencies at the scene. Firstly, the gun was positioned strangely on the bed. And secondly, fire accelerant traces revealed arson. Thirdly, one of the shell casings from the gun had already been removed to stage the scene as a suicide. But in all, it was Nikki's statement and ever-changing story and behavior that was her undoing. After a 6-day trial, jurors took just 2 hours to find Nikki guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit arson, and conspiracy to tamper with physical evidence. After trial, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. And after the sentence, the woman who had traded her husband's life for insurance money and a lover's promise finally faced the reality that her calculated gamble had cost her everything. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.